My name is Lillian, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm standing in my childhood bedroom packing the last of my belongings into cardboard boxes. Growing up, I was always the responsible older sister, the one who tried to keep peace in our family no matter what storms were brewing. My younger brother Daniel is getting married next weekend, and just a week ago, I was so excited to be his maid of honor. I had everything planned perfectly from organizing the bachelorette party to designing the wedding invitations by hand. But 3 days ago, everything changed when my mother made a request that shattered my world completely. Before I dive into what happened that turned my life upside down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family drama and finding your strength. Now, let me tell you about the moment my family showed me exactly where I stood in their priorities. To understand what happened, you need to know about my family. We live in Denver, Colorado, and from the outside, we look like the perfect upper middle class American family. My father Marcus works as a successful architect designing custom homes for wealthy clients throughout the city. He's built quite a reputation over the past 20 years, and his work has been featured in several home design magazines. My mother Patricia runs her own high-end interior design business, and she's built an impressive clientele among Denver's elite social circles. She's always been obsessed with appearances and making sure everything in our lives looks absolutely flawless. Our house is like something out of a magazine with every detail carefully curated to project success and sophistication. My brother Daniel just graduated from medical school at 25, and he's marrying his college sweetheart Emma, who teaches kindergarten at a local elementary school. Emma comes from a much more modest background than us. Her parents are both retired teachers, and they live in a small ranch house on the other side of town. But she's absolutely perfect for Daniel, kind and patient, and everything he needs in a partner. I work as a freelance graphic designer, living in a small apartment downtown while saving money for my future. It's not glamorous, but I love the creative freedom and the variety of projects I get to work on. I've been building my client base slowly but steadily over the past few years, working with everything from local restaurants to nonprofit organizations. Growing up, I learned early that I was the family peacekeeper. When tensions would arise between my perfectionist mother and my free-spirited brother, I would step in to mediate. I remember countless family dinners where I would redirect conversations the moment I sensed conflict brewing. During Christmas mornings, I made sure everyone got equal attention and felt included. Somehow I became the emotional caretaker of the entire family without anyone ever asking me to take on that role. When Daniel announced his engagement 6 months ago, our whole family was thrilled. But along with the joy came stress, because Patricia immediately began planning what she called the wedding of the century. She wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, from the flowers, to the photography, to the reception venue. No detail was too small for her attention. I volunteered to help with everything, spending my evenings after work, addressing invitations by hand in beautiful calligraphy. I coordinated with vendors, served as a liaison between Emma's modest family and Patricia's grand vision, and spent countless weekends running errands for wedding preparations. I designed custom invitations that perfectly captured Daniel and Emma's love story, created a beautiful website for their wedding, and even organized Emma's bachelorette party, down to every last detail. Looking back now, I realize I was doing all of this work not just out of love for my brother, but because I desperately wanted to feel needed and valued by my family. Every compliment Patricia gave me about my contributions felt like validation that I was worthy of love and inclusion. I thought I was securing my place as an essential part of this important family milestone. About 3 weeks before the wedding, I started noticing subtle changes in my mother's behavior that made me uncomfortable. She began making offhand comments about the guest list being too crowded and complaining about how expensive the catering was becoming. These weren't major concerns at first, just little grumbles here and there that I initially dismissed as typical pre-wedding stress that every mother of the groom experiences. But then Patricia started questioning whether certain family friends really needed to be invited, despite these same people being on the original guest list for months. She would go through the list during our weekly planning meetings, circling names with a red pen and muttering about how the costs were spiraling out of control. When I suggested we could make small adjustments to the menu or decorations to save money, she would wave me off dismissively and say she had it all handled. What really bothered me was how she began treating Emma during this stressful period. Patricia started overriding Emma's gentle preferences for simplicity, insisting on expensive upgrades that Emma clearly didn't want or need. When Emma's parents offered to contribute more money to help with the mounting costs, Patricia dismissed their offer with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand, saying it was all handled while privately complaining to me about their family's modest financial situation. The first major conflict happened during a dress-fitting appointment at an upscale bridal boutique downtown. Emma had brought her grandmother's pearl necklace to wear with her wedding dress, a beautiful vintage piece that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in her family. When she showed it to Patricia, my mother immediately criticized it in front of the seamstress and other staff, calling it dated and suggesting Emma needed something more modern and sophisticated for such an elegant wedding. I watched Emma's face crumble as Patricia continued her critique, pointing out how the pearls didn't match the contemporary style of the dress and how they might look out of place in the professional wedding photos she had spent so much money on. Emma excused herself to the bathroom, and I followed her to find her crying quietly in the narrow hallway outside the fitting rooms. I spent 20 minutes reassuring Emma that the necklace was absolutely beautiful and meaningful, that her grandmother would be so proud to see her wearing it on her special day. I helped her compose herself and convinced her to ignore Patricia's hurtful comments. But this became a recurring pattern over the following weeks, with me constantly running interference between Patricia's criticism and Emma's hurt feelings. Every time Patricia made a cutting comment or dismissed someone's feelings, I found myself in damage control mode. I would comfort Emma after particularly difficult planning meetings, reassure Daniel that everything was going to be perfect despite the mounting tensions, and try to smooth things over with vendors who were getting frustrated by Patricia's constant changes and unrealistic demands. Meanwhile, Daniel remained largely oblivious to these growing problems. He was completely overwhelmed with final medical school exams and residency applications, trusting that the women in his life had everything under control. When I tried to gently alert him to Emma's stress and Patricia's increasingly controlling behavior, he would dismiss my concerns with a tired smile, saying that Mom just wanted everything to be perfect and that it would all work out fine once the wedding was over. I realized I was carrying the emotional burden of the entire wedding planning process completely alone, trying to protect everyone's feelings while my own needs and concerns were being completely ignored. The stress was starting to affect my work productivity and my sleep patterns, but I kept telling myself it was only temporary and that everything would return to normal once the wedding was over and everyone could relax again. 3 days before the wedding, Patricia called me early in the morning asking me to come to the family house for what she described as an emergency family meeting. I assumed we needed to discuss some last-minute wedding details or maybe address a problem with one of the vendors that required immediate attention. I quickly finished up a client project I was working on and drove over to the house expecting a typical planning session where we would solve whatever crisis had emerged. But when I arrived, I found Patricia sitting in our formal living room, which we only used for special occasions or important family discussions. The room felt cold and intimidating with its expensive furniture and carefully arranged art pieces. Spread across the mahogany coffee table were typed lists, a calculator receipts, and what looked like a detailed budget breakdown with highlighted sections and handwritten notes in the margins. Patricia was dressed impeccably as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and her makeup flawless despite the early hour. She gestured for me to sit across from her in one of the matching cream-colored armchairs, and I noticed she had printed out multiple copies of whatever documents she was reviewing, as if she had been preparing for this meeting for some time. She began by explaining that the wedding costs had spiraled completely out of control, far beyond what the family had originally budgeted for the celebration. She spoke in the same professional tone she used with difficult clients, detached and businesslike. According to her detailed calculations, they were facing significant financial strain and difficult decisions needed to be made immediately to bring the expenses back in line with what they could realistically afford. Then she presented me with the most shocking proposal I had ever heard in my entire life. She explained that since I was single with no plus one anyway, removing me from both the wedding party and the guest list entirely would save substantial money on catering, flowers, photography, and numerous other expenses. She had already calculated the exact savings down to the penny, including the cost of my bridesmaid bouquet and the chair I would have occupied at the reception. I sat in stunned silence as she continued laying out her plan with the cold efficiency of a business presentation. She explained how they could return my bridesmaid dress to recover that expense, eliminate my bouquet from the floral order, reduce the photographer's time since there would be one less person in the wedding party photos, and cut the catering count by one person. She even mentioned that they could save money on wedding favors and centerpieces with one fewer person at the reception. But then she added something that made my blood run completely cold. She suggested I could still watch the ceremony online since they were planning to live stream for distant relatives who couldn't travel to Denver. She said this with a completely straight face, as if watching my only brother's wedding through a computer screen was a perfectly reasonable alternative to being there in person to support him on the most important day of his life. When I finally found my voice, I pointed out that I had been planning this wedding alongside her for 6 long months, that I had already spent hundreds of my own hard-earned dollars organizing the bachelorette party, designing and printing invitations, and buying thoughtful gifts for the couple. More importantly, I emphasized that I was Daniel's only sister, his closest family member besides our parents, and that my absence would be noticed and questioned by every single person at the wedding. Patricia's response was even more devastating than her original proposal. She told me coldly that sometimes families have to make hard choices during difficult financial times, and that I should understand this given my practical nature and my work in the business world. She acted as if I was being completely unreasonable for expecting to attend my own brother's wedding, as if my hurt feelings were somehow secondary to the family's financial concerns. But then the real truth came out, and it had absolutely nothing to do with money or budget constraints. Patricia admitted that she was actually concerned about how things would look in the wedding photos and at the reception. She pointed out that I was the only unmarried person in the immediate family over 25, and she worried that having me prominently featured in the wedding party would somehow emphasize that fact. She wanted the family photos to look complete and successful, and apparently my single status at 28 was somehow a reflection of family failure in her twisted mind. This revelation hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I realized that this conversation wasn't about wedding expenses at all. This was about my mother's perception that I was an embarrassment to the carefully crafted family image, that my unmarried status was somehow a problem that needed to be hidden rather than simply accepted as a normal part of life. I asked if Daniel knew about this devastating decision, and Patricia admitted he had absolutely no idea what she was planning. She claimed it would be better to present this as my choice to bow out gracefully rather than worry him with family drama so close to his wedding day. She actually expected me to help her fabricate a believable story about why I had suddenly decided not to participate in the most important day of my brother's life. I spent that entire sleepless night walking through my small apartment, unable to rest or focus on anything except my mother's devastating ultimatum. Everywhere I looked, I saw painful reminders of the months I had devoted to making Daniel's wedding absolutely perfect. My dining room table was completely covered with invitation proofs and RSVP tracking lists. My computer screen showed draft after draft of the wedding website I had designed, with beautiful photos and heartfelt descriptions of their love story. Photos from Emma's bachelorette party were still scattered across my coffee table, memories of the beautiful celebration I had planned and paid for entirely with my own money. I had organized a weekend in Aspen with spa treatments, wine tasting, and thoughtful activities that I knew Emma would love all because I wanted her to feel welcomed and celebrated as she joined our family. Around 3 a.m, I called my best friend from college, Madison, who now lives in Portland, Oregon. Through tears and broken sentences that I could barely manage, I explained what had happened, how my own mother had essentially uninvited me from my brother's wedding and expected me to pretend it was my own choice. Madison listened without interruption, her anger growing with each devastating detail I shared. She helped me see what I had been too hurt and shocked to recognize immediately. This wasn't really about wedding costs, or even about my unmarried status creating some imaginary embarrassment. This was about a much deeper pattern of emotional manipulation and control that had been building in my family for years with me as the primary target. Madison reminded me of other instances where I had sacrificed my own needs and happiness for what Patricia always called family harmony. Like when I skipped my own college graduation celebration because Patricia had already planned a big party for Daniel's high school graduation the same weekend, and she said it would be too much work to coordinate two separate celebrations. Or when I used my entire savings account to help pay for Daniel's medical school application fees, because our parents were having what they called a temporary cash flow problem, even though they continued spending money on expensive renovations and luxury vacations during that same period. She also reminded me of the countless times I had rearranged my work schedule and canceled personal plans to accommodate family events and emergencies that somehow always took priority over my own life and career needs. Madison asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks and forced me to really think about my situation. She asked what would realistically happen if I simply refused to go along with Patricia's plan. If I confronted her directly and demanded to be included in the wedding as Daniel's sister and original maid of honor, what would be the likely outcome? I realized immediately that confronting Patricia would only lead to more manipulation and emotional warfare that would make everything worse. She would claim I was being dramatic and selfish, that I was putting my own hurt feelings ahead of what was best for the family during this stressful time. She would paint herself as the victim, the devoted mother who was just trying to hold everything together under difficult financial circumstances while dealing with an ungrateful daughter. And Daniel, already completely stressed about his wedding and starting his medical residency in just a few weeks, wouldn't want to deal with family conflict. He would be pressured to choose sides, and I knew Patricia would make sure he saw me as the problem rather than understanding the real issues at play. That's when I made a decision that surprised even myself. I wouldn't fight Patricia's cruel exclusion, but I also wouldn't participate in her elaborate deception. Instead of arguing or pleading for inclusion like she probably expected, I would simply disappear entirely from the situation. I would leave Denver and let the family explain my absence however they chose, while I took some much-needed time away to seriously evaluate whether these relationships were actually healthy for me. I called Madison back and asked if I could come visit Portland for what might be an extended stay. She immediately said yes, without asking any questions, and started helping me plan what we both knew was really an escape from a toxic situation. We looked up flights leaving Denver the morning of the wedding, ensuring I would be completely unreachable when the family realized I wasn't going to play along with their hurtful charade. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my somber mood perfectly as I made my final preparations to leave Denver and everything I had known my entire life. I loaded my hastily packed suitcases into my car and drove to the family house one last time, knowing it might be many months before I would return if I ever chose to return at all. Using my spare key that I had kept since high school, I quietly entered through the side door that led directly into the kitchen. The house felt eerily quiet in the early morning hours, with everyone still sleeping before what should have been the happiest day in our family's recent history. I placed 3 sealed letters on the granite kitchen counter, where Patricia would definitely find them when she came downstairs to start the elaborate family breakfast she had planned. I took one final look around the house where I had grown up, studying the family photos that lined the hallway and showed years of carefully orchestrated perfection. In every single picture, I was smiling brightly and playing my assigned role as the dutiful daughter and loving sister, never letting on how much emotional effort it took to maintain that peaceful facade. My flight to Portland left Denver International Airport at exactly 10 in the morning. As I sat in the departure lounge waiting to board, I turned off my phone after sending one final text message to Madison confirming my arrival time. The 5-hour flight felt both eternal and too short as I alternated between anxiety about my family's reaction and an unexpected sense of relief at escaping a situation that had become completely toxic for my mental health. Madison met me at Portland International Airport with the warmest, most genuine hug I had received in months, and she asked no questions about my red-rimmed eyes or obvious emotional exhaustion. During the drive to her house in the trendy Hawthorne neighborhood, she kept the conversation light and welcoming, pointing out local landmarks and telling me about the coffee shops and bookstores we would explore together during my stay. Her craftsman-style house felt like a true sanctuary after the emotional turmoil of the past few days. She had thoughtfully prepared the converted basement apartment that she normally used as a home office, complete with fresh flowers on the nightstand and a bottle of wine for when I felt ready to process everything that had happened. Meanwhile, back in Denver, the wedding day was unfolding very differently than Patricia had carefully planned. She discovered my letters while setting up the elaborate family breakfast she had organized for the morning before wedding preparations began. The first letter she opened was addressed to Mom and Dad, and as she read my calm but firm explanation of why I couldn't participate in their wedding charade, I imagine her carefully applied makeup began to smudge with tears of rage and panic. My letter explained that I refused to pretend my absence was my own choice, when it clearly wasn't, that I was completely exhausted from being treated as expendable, whenever family image mattered more than family love, and that I needed significant time away to determine whether these relationships could ever be based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. Patricia immediately tried calling my phone multiple times, but it went straight to voicemail since I had already turned it off at the airport hours earlier. She tried calling again and again throughout the morning, leaving increasingly frantic messages demanding that I call her back immediately and stop this ridiculous dramatic behavior that was ruining Daniel's special day. She woke Marcus in a complete panic, showing him my letter with shaking hands and expecting him to share her outrage at my selfishness. But I imagine his reaction was very different from what she expected. Instead of joining her anger at my supposedly unreasonable behavior, he read the letter with growing concern about what had actually driven his daughter to such a drastic decision. For the first time in many years, Marcus questioned Patricia's version of events and wondered what had really happened during those private mother-daughter conversations about wedding planning that had clearly gone very wrong. Daniel received his letter 2 hours later while he was getting ready at the downtown hotel where the wedding party was staying. Emma was having her hair done in the adjoining suite when Daniel called out for her to come read something important that had just been delivered. His letter was gentler than the one I had written to our parents, but equally clear about my decision and the reasons behind it. I had explained that I loved him deeply and wanted nothing but happiness for him and Emma, but that I simply couldn't watch him get married under circumstances that excluded me through no fault of my own. I needed him to understand that family loyalty should work both directions and that love shouldn't require accepting treatment that diminishes your dignity and self-worth. Emma's letter was the shortest but perhaps the most important of the three. I simply apologized for any stress my absence might cause on what should be the happiest day of her life, emphasized that this decision had absolutely nothing to do with her personally, and expressed my genuine wishes for her happiness with Daniel. I wanted her to know that I thought she was absolutely perfect for my brother, and that my absence reflected serious problems with my parents, not with her or their relationship. The wedding ceremony proceeded as scheduled at 4 that afternoon, but the shadow of my conspicuous absence affected everyone in completely different ways. Patricia struggled to maintain her composed facade, while fielding questions from relatives and family friends about where I was and why I wasn't in the wedding party as originally planned. She ultimately settled on claiming that a sudden family emergency had kept me away, a vague lie that satisfied most guests but felt hollow to those who knew me well and had expected to see me there. Marcus appeared distracted and guilty throughout the entire ceremony, clearly wrestling with his role in driving his daughter away from such an important family milestone. Several times during the reception, guests noticed him stepping outside to try calling my phone, leaving voicemails apologizing and asking me to please come home so we could work everything out like a normal family. Daniel managed to enjoy his wedding day with Emma, but several guests mentioned that he kept glancing at the empty space where I should have been standing during the ceremony and reception. In his emotional wedding toast, he made a point of mentioning how much he missed having his sister there to celebrate with them, a comment that made Patricia visibly uncomfortable and caused murmurs among guests who hadn't understood why I was missing in the first place. My first week in Portland passed in a therapeutic blur of sleeping late crying, when I needed to walking through unfamiliar neighborhoods to clear my head and having long, honest conversations with Madison about family dynamics and self-worth. She gave me all the space I needed to process my complicated emotions without any pressure or judgment, letting me talk through years of accumulated hurt and frustration at my own pace. The city itself felt like a healing balm after the intensity of Denver and my suffocating family situation. Portland's laid-back culture and emphasis on individuality was such a refreshing contrast to the appearance-focused environment I had grown up in, where everything was about maintaining perfect facades rather than authentic relationships. I spent hours walking through different neighborhoods discovering quirky independent bookstores, artisan coffee roasters, and art galleries that celebrated creativity and authenticity over perfection and status. The people I met were genuinely friendly without any hidden agendas or social climbing motivations. I kept my phone turned off for the entire first week, knowing that my family needed time to process my decision and deal with the consequences of their actions without the option of immediately contacting me for damage control or manipulation. Madison respected my need for complete silence and helped me focus on taking care of myself rather than worrying about managing everyone else's reactions to my choices. When I finally felt emotionally ready to turn my phone back on 7 days after the wedding, I discovered 47 missed calls, 32 voicemails, and dozens of text messages that had accumulated during my digital silence. The progression of messages revealed my family's evolving understanding of what had really happened and why I had felt compelled to leave everything behind. Patricia's early messages were predictably angry and accusatory, calling me selfish and dramatic for ruining Daniel's wedding day with what she called my tantrum. She demanded that I stop this ridiculous behavior immediately and come home to face the consequences of my actions like a responsible adult. Her tone was exactly what I had expected, focused more on how my absence had affected her reputation than on understanding why I had felt so unwanted and disposable. Marcus's messages were completely different from Patricia's, concerned and apologetic from the very beginning. He admitted that he had failed to understand how much pain I had been carrying and asked me to please call him when I felt ready to have an honest conversation. His later messages revealed that he was beginning to see Patricia's behavior toward me much more clearly and questioning his own role in enabling the family dynamics that had ultimately driven me away. Daniel's messages showed the most dramatic evolution over the course of that week. His initial calls were confused and hurt, asking why I would choose to miss his wedding over what seemed to him like a simple misunderstanding about guest lists and wedding expenses. But as the days passed and he had time to really think about my letter and discuss the situation with Emma, who had observed more than I realized, his tone changed completely. The real turning point came in a voicemail Daniel left 3 days after the wedding. His voice sounded tired, but thoughtful, as he explained that Emma had helped him understand what had really been happening during those months of wedding preparation. Emma had suspected that Patricia's behavior toward her was problematic, but she hadn't realized how much worse it had been for me, as what she now recognized was the family scapegoat. Daniel admitted that he had been so completely focused on his own stress about medical school finals and starting his residency that he had failed to notice how much emotional labor I was carrying or how poorly Patricia was treating both his fiancée and his sister. He apologized sincerely for not protecting me when I needed him most, and asked me to call him when I was ready to have the kind of honest conversation we should have had months earlier. After listening to all the accumulated messages, I made the decision to extend my stay in Portland indefinitely, rather than rushing back into a situation that hadn't fundamentally changed just because everyone was now dealing with the consequences of their actions. I reached out to several Portland-based companies about freelance graphic design opportunities and was pleasantly surprised to discover how welcoming and vibrant the creative community was in the city. The collaborative atmosphere was so different from the competitive status-driven environment I was used to in Denver. Madison helped me find a permanent apartment in the same neighborhood where she lived, a sunny one-bedroom place with beautiful hardwood floors and large windows that filled the space with natural light throughout the day. For the first time in my adult life, I was making major decisions based entirely on what I wanted and needed rather than what would make my family happy or maintain peace in our complicated relationships. I also started seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and codependency issues. Through our weekly sessions, I began understanding the long-standing patterns that had led to this crisis and learning practical tools for setting healthy boundaries in all my relationships, both current and future. 6 months after leaving Denver behind, I had successfully built a life in Portland that felt more authentic and fulfilling than anything I had ever experienced before. My freelance graphic design business was thriving with several local nonprofits and small businesses as regular clients who genuinely appreciated both my creative skills and my professional reliability. I had joined a weekend hiking group that explored different trails around Mount Hood and the spectacular Columbia River Gorge. The physical challenge and natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest helped heal something deep inside me that I hadn't even realized was broken by years of emotional stress and family dysfunction. I also started taking pottery classes at a local community studio, discovering a meditative and creative outlet that had nothing to do with deadlines, client expectations, or pleasing other people. Working with clay taught me patience and showed me that beautiful things can emerge from starting over completely. Most importantly, I was developing genuine friendships based on mutual interests, shared values, and respect, rather than caretaking roles or family obligation. These new relationships felt balanced and healthy, in ways that my family relationships had never been helping me understand what I had been missing during all those years of managing other people's emotions. The healing process wasn't linear or simple, and I had to accept that recovery from family trauma takes time and patience with yourself. Some days I missed my family intensely and questioned whether I had overreacted to what might have been just a temporary stress-related conflict that could have been resolved with better communication. Other days I felt genuinely angry about the years I had spent managing everyone else's emotions and needs while completely neglecting my own personal growth and happiness. Therapy helped me navigate these conflicting feelings and develop healthy tools for any potential future family interactions. I learned that grief isn't just about death, but also about the loss of relationships and dreams that were never quite as real as you believed them to be. I had to mourn the family I thought I had, the unconditional love and acceptance I had believed existed, and the role I had played in maintaining illusions that ultimately hurt everyone involved. But alongside the grief came an unexpected and liberating sense of freedom and possibility. For the first time in my entire adult life, I was making choices based on my own authentic values and desires rather than trying to manage other people's reactions or maintain family harmony at the expense of my own dignity and self-worth. Daniel surprised me by visiting Portland for a long weekend in the spring, marking the first time I had seen him since before his wedding day. Our reunion was emotional but genuinely positive, and I could see how much he had grown and matured during our months of separation. He was taking real responsibility for his role in the family dynamics and working hard to develop healthier patterns in his own marriage with Emma. He updated me thoroughly on the family situation without pressuring me to make any immediate decisions about reconciliation or forgiveness. Marcus had been attending individual counseling sessions to address his lifelong pattern of conflict avoidance, and his new willingness to finally confront difficult issues had put significant strain on his marriage with Patricia. Patricia had initially resisted any suggestion that her actions toward me had been inappropriate or harmful, maintaining that she had only been trying to manage a genuinely difficult financial situation in the best way she knew how. But the loss of her relationship with me, combined with Marcus's new willingness to challenge her version of events, had forced her to examine her priorities and behavior patterns more honestly. Daniel shared that Patricia had expressed what seemed like genuine remorse for how she had handled the wedding situation, though she still struggled to articulate her feelings without becoming defensive or trying to justify her actions in some way. He made it very clear that he wasn't asking me to forgive her or rebuild that relationship, but he wanted me to know that there appeared to be some authentic recognition that serious mistakes had been made. Emma had sent me a thoughtful birthday card a few weeks earlier, thanking me for all the sacrifices I had made during their wedding planning process and expressing sincere hope that we could develop our own independent relationship that wasn't defined by the family drama. Her gesture meant more to me than any grand reconciliation attempt would have, because it acknowledged my individual worth rather than just my function as a family peacekeeper. As I reflected on my journey over those transformative 6 months, I realized that disappearing from Denver hadn't really been about punishing my family for their treatment of me, though it had certainly had that effect. It had been about saving myself from a destructive pattern of self-sacrifice that was slowly eroding my sense of personal agency and self-worth. The hardest lesson I had learned was that truly loving people doesn't mean absorbing their dysfunction or taking responsibility for managing their emotions and reactions. Healthy relationships require clear boundaries that protect your own well-being while still allowing space for authentic connection based on mutual respect rather than need guilt or obligation. I also discovered that family relationships, like all meaningful relationships, require genuine effort and consideration from all parties involved. My willingness to always accommodate others' needs and smooth over conflicts had actually taught them that my own needs were negotiable and my feelings were less important, creating a dynamic that wasn't healthy or sustainable for anyone involved. Looking toward the future, I remained cautiously open to the possibility of rebuilding certain family relationships, but only if they could be based on equality, honesty, and genuine care, rather than obligation and emotional caretaking. I had learned to trust my instincts about how people treat me and to prioritize my own well-being without the crushing guilt that had previously consumed me. The most profound realization was understanding that I had spent my entire adult life believing that my worth came from being useful to others, from preventing conflict and managing difficult emotions. But true self-worth comes from honoring your own values and needs, from building a life that reflects your authentic self rather than the version of yourself that keeps other people comfortable and happy. The family crisis, that had initially felt completely devastating, ultimately became the catalyst for the most honest, fulfilling, and authentic period of my entire life. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do both for yourself and for the people you care about is to step away from unhealthy patterns and refuse to participate in dynamics that diminish your dignity and self-respect. Not every family story has a fairy tale reconciliation, where everyone apologizes and learns to treat each other better, and I came to understand that this outcome was perfectly acceptable and even healthy in some situations. What truly mattered was learning to love myself enough to demand the same respect and consideration that I had always freely given to others without expecting anything in return. Some relationships can be healed and rebuilt on healthier foundations, with time, effort, and genuine change from all parties. Others serve their purpose for a season, and then naturally end when they become more harmful than beneficial. Learning to accept both possibilities with grace and wisdom was part of my healing process. My mother told me not to come to the wedding expecting me to quietly accept exclusion and even help her cover up the real reasons for my absence. Instead, I didn't just skip the ceremony as she had demanded. I disappeared entirely from their lives and built a completely new existence where my presence is genuinely valued, my contributions are appreciated, and my worth isn't contingent on how well I manage other people's emotions or maintain perfect family appearances. Sometimes the most shocking and powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept treatment that doesn't match your actual value as a human being. Walking away from my family wasn't about revenge punishment or making a dramatic statement. It was about choosing self-respect over the comfortable familiarity of dysfunction and discovering that I was worthy of relationships built on love and mutual respect rather than need and obligation. The girl who once believed her primary job was to keep everyone else happy at the expense of her own needs and dreams has learned that the most important relationship you can nurture is the honest, compassionate one you have with yourself. And that relationship built on authenticity and self-compassion has become the solid foundation for everything else good. that has entered my life since I found the courage to choose myself. Have you ever been in a situation where family loyalty felt more like emotional manipulation? What would you do if you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity intact? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with your own family struggles, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about relationships, family dynamics, and finding the courage to put yourself first when no one else will. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're worth more than the role others expect them to play in their lives. Thank you so much for listening to my story with such patience and understanding. I hope it serves as a reminder that your presence in this world matters far more than your usefulness to others, and that choosing yourself isn't selfish but absolutely necessary for your mental health and happiness. Until next time, remember that you deserve relationships that celebrate who you are, rather than demanding you shrink yourself to make others comfortable.